Okay, welcome back. Thank you for sticking with us. You gotta admit that we were definitely quicker that first video. I think
That's assuming we have repeat listeners.
We were somewhere around 40 minutes, so we're slowly getting there.
And if you're just joining us for this video for the first time, welcome. Happy to have you.
Yes, happy to have you.
Jackson Pellingra and
Austin Meehan
with you.
So,
anyway,
both seniors in the Orlando area.
Oh, hey, we don't want to give too much of our identities. Let's not attract unsavory characters.
Today is Thursday, April 16th. I'm actually about to catch a flight to Chicago. But
all right, so let's get into the Eastern Conference.
Let's get into quote unquote my more interesting conference for me.
And let's start with a series that I think is more compelling than it appears on paper, which is Atlanta versus Brooklyn. Now, I'll preface this with I think that Atlanta will win this series comfortably. But for people to just write this off as automatic sweep or 4-1, I think is slightly incorrect because, for one, Atlanta has returned to earth in terms of their play.
That's where I thought you were going with that.
The last 25 games, I think that's more of just playing to the mean. I think they were playing. I mean, they're obviously a very well constructed team that's very balanced, but I think they were playing above their heads a little bit and benefiting from a very, very weak conference. But they're obviously still a really good, solid team. But I also think that Brooklyn is relatively healthy now and has been playing the best they've played all season, the last 10, 15 games or so. So I think that I wouldn't be surprised if they took 2 games off them, which is usually a bit surprising for an 8 to do off of 1. Especially in the East lately. I'm not saying I'm predicting that, but it wouldn't be surprising at all. How do you feel about this series?
Keep talking. I gotta look up something.
Well, this is really you're blocking the speaker. You're bringing a lot to the table here. Thanks, I appreciate it. Yeah. So obviously.
All right, I'm back. I was just looking up who their coach was.
That's why we do our research off there.
Lionel Hollins obviously has playoff experience as a head coach, and that's something Jason Kidd didn't have last season. But I think it should be said, and we'll get into this in a few minutes. But Jason Kidd has been in the league 2 years as a head coach and 2 playoff appearances. Something needs to be said for that, but we'll get into that.
Well,
granted,
I think he's facing.
It's the Eastern Conference, so
I think he's facing off against a superior coach in Budenholzer, who has turned Dennis Schroeder into a household name somehow, which is pretty remarkable.
The German.
And and this is not to say that Atlanta is not a talented team. It's just he's taken guys who have always been known as pretty reliable, but the best compliment you could give to them is solid players, and transform them into a unit that brings out the best in all the guys. I mean, that's exemplified by Korver, who has just been a god from the 3-point line this season.
An all-star.
Right.
Never in my wildest dreams thought he'd be an all-star.
It's cool to see. And obviously Horford's return has people really. You don't hear that enough when discussing the Hawks' rise this season. That they were just missing him most of last year, and obviously he's a really high impact player. And also Millsap has come in and had a very, very strong season. So they're Spurs East pretty much in their style of play.
Although Cephalosha's injury could maybe.
And his legal troubles.
Yes, his incident with the NYPD.
Right, but from what I've heard, I don't think his absence will matter this series if he's gone. And
Right.
from
He'll
what I'm
never be an offensive threat. It's more of his, obviously his defense.
is rebounding and spacing he provides.
Yeah.
But from what I'm reading, he would probably be back in time for a second round series where his presence would be relevant. So yeah, it wouldn't be surprising if Brooklyn took off 2 games, but I think Atlanta in 5 is a reasonable pick.
Right. If you're just basing this off rosters, I'd probably still say Atlanta would win. Because you got Darren Williams. I honestly.
Got Lopez.
Yeah. Who always seems to be hurt. Maybe that's why I don't remember him.
Yeah, well, I don't think there's a question that Atlanta's roster is stronger, and they play much more cohesively. Obviously, that's why they have over 60 wins.
Yeah.
But Brooklyn has shown at times maybe a glimmer of what their true potential could have been if they hadn't been hampered by injury over these past 2 years.
Mason Plumlee, Thaddeus Young.
Actually, Bogdanovich has been.
Joe Johnson, I should have remembered him.
ISO Joe. Bogdanovich has been surprisingly good for them this year, but I think that they're
luckily Lopez has managed to stay healthy for playing 72 games.
Right, which is a rarity for him. So no, they're not
Williams with an off.
Well, he's just
out of character.
He's never returned to his old form.
Right.
But certainly not. Even though the East is a joke of a conference compared to the West, certainly not a complete joke of an 8 seed. But I think that Atlanta will take care of them pretty swiftly.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I think it's Atlanta in 5.
Right. So, moving on to one of these teams is probably the surprise team of the year to make the playoffs in Boston. Honestly, actually, we missed our Eastern Conference Coach of the Year discussion, and we wanted.
There's also.
Well, I was about to say, Brad Stevens is a serious contender, taking a team that was supposed to be another tank season essentially, and bringing them to 40 wins, even in an awful conference.
Once they got rid of Rondo, is sort of like, we're just sort of holding off on this season, whatever.
Right, and somehow these guys have had motivation. I suppose a lot of it's because they're very young and they're guys who are motivated to make their mark and make their money, so they do have motivation to play well.
They're a proud franchise.
So. Right, and players don't necessarily have incentive to tank like an organization would, because hey, what does a guy care if a couple years down the line the team's gonna be really good because they have a lot of draft picks? Because that guy would probably be out of the league if he's on a tanking team. Mm-hmm. And Brad Stevens clearly has been able to motivate them.
On the same discussion of Coach of the Year, do you consider Blatt?
I don't think he's under consideration, but I think he's done.
I think Budenholzer just from.
Well, let's finish with Blatt first before we, just to finish that thought. Blatt has been very competent and stood up against the, I think, frankly absurd criticism of him that he couldn't handle. I think that was totally unfounded and unfair. Yeah. But because, you have to find things to talk about. There's only so much you can talk about the actual games, or at least for some journalists. So, but I think he's been totally competent. But we haven't seen enough of what he can actually do in terms of like playoff play calling and sustained success.
Right.
So I think that the two serious contenders are Budenholzer and Stevens, with Budenholzer taking the award home.
But that's just because Atlanta's the 1 seed, and I don't think anybody predicted that they would have had this great of a season.
Right.
I mean,
right.
without Atlanta having the season they're having, Brad Stevens is, I think, hands down,
Right, of
the
course.
coach of the year in the East.
And I think, although, I think let's give ourselves a little credit. I think we both were debating strongly over Atlanta, Washington, or Miami to win that division. And obviously, Miami's had many injury problems. So, although I still think even fully healthy, Atlanta's better than Miami this season. I think that's pretty clear. So, yeah, Budenholzer, he's pretty much transferred the Popovich style system of balance, spreading the ball around, and getting the ball in the hands of efficient shooters. He's brought that over to the East, and it's shockingly so worked great.
And it's nice to see that they were able to move past their off-season racial troubles with Danny Ferry.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure the players have
say what you want, but I think that could have really affected them at the beginning of the season.
Sure.
In a negative way.
But these guys have bigger things to worry about than some guys' ass-hatted, offhand comments.
Yeah.
And it certainly wasn't as severe as the Sterling situation. So yeah, Atlanta in 5. So moving back to there was a little tangent, but I think it was a worthwhile one. To the Cleveland-Boston matchup, I think it's amazing what Boston's done, but I think Cleveland is going to absolutely savage them.
Yes.
Because I think Cleveland is the best team in the conference.
Savage is I was going to say, dominate.
Yeah, I mean,
It's very similar. I mean, I don't see how any way that Boston could win a game in this series. I really don't see it.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, granted, I'd classify myself as a Cleveland fan. I'd like to see Boston win a game. More likely at home. I just of all 16 teams in the playoffs, they by far have the worst roster.
Yeah, I think Brooklyn is a better team despite having a slightly worse record.
Right.
And Cleveland, once they found their pieces to fit in with J.R. Smith and
Mozgov.
I always forget Timofey. Once they slotted
He's
had a
both
great
those
season.
Both those guys.
No, they're the perfect fits for that team. Once they've sort of completed their roster, because their roster was sort of incomplete coming into the season, and they've shored things up defensively. I mean, they've just been
Although Shumpert has been hurt.
Right, but I mean, they've had a pretty dominant season since the All-Star break.
I think what also needs to be said about this series is just going back to Stevens, his time at Butler. He's used to being the underdog,
Right.
and I certainly, I'd be absolutely stunned if Boston was able to win this series. But then again, do I think it's a possibility?
No, it's not. No, not even remotely.
Maybe it's just because Stevens. Maybe if Boston had a different coach.
And to me, it's absurd to consider Boston winning this series.
Yeah.
I
don't even think Brad Stevens and his underdog mentality could.
That would probably be the biggest upset in NBA playoff history. That'd be easily bigger than Golden State over 8 seed Golden State over 1 Dallas. What was that, like 2007 or so? That would definitely be a bigger upset. Obviously bigger than 8 Memphis over 1 San Antonio, I think.
Yeah.
Because Boston is not the team that
just
those teams were.
compare rosters, and I think there's your determining factor.
Yeah,
So
I think
we're both saying
barring Love and Irving getting injured in the first 5 minutes of the first game and having to miss the rest of the series, I think it's.
I still think Cleveland would win. Really.
Yeah, they probably would actually. It'd be a lot closer,
It'd
but
be a lot closer, a lot more interesting, but.
Right, but.
But this series, you go back to maybe like 09, 08. I mean, this was like a premier. This was one of the bigger rivalries.
Oh right, well, Boston with their 3 was.
Yeah.
I mean, they came close to winning 2 championships, and even in the twilight of their 3, gave Miami a very difficult time when they were at their heyday.
Yeah. Cleveland and Boston really had some great battles.
Oh, right, where people developed the ridiculous no clutch thing.
Yeah.
For LeBron.
Yeah. It was a couple seasons in a row where they met in the conference finals and
Right.
whatever. So, but it won't happen these playoffs.
No.
So, this next series is, I mean, obviously both teams don't have to travel too far. Probably be able to sleep in their own beds overnight. Chicago and Milwaukee. Once again, I really don't. This is much like the other series. Maybe Milwaukee wins a game at home.
I wouldn't expect a sweep in this series.
Just because they're so familiar with each other.
Well, and because, I mean, Chicago's had a nice season, but lacking. It's the elephant in the room is the Rose thing.
Honestly, they struggle to shoot. I mean,
right. Well,
Kirk Heinrich's shooting like 34%. Dunleavy's, I mean, he's shooting like 40. Noah's had an off season.
Really, Mirotic has been the big bright spot for Chicago this season, and Jimmy Butler, obviously.
I really would have thought McDermott would have had a bigger role on this team, but so far he hasn't been able to.
Yeah, I mean, hey, he's young.
He hasn't been able to sort of establish himself.
But Rose, to me, it's sort of inconsequential whether he played in this series or not, because he doesn't add much in his current state.
Yeah.
He's just pretty much been bad most of the time he's been in this season. I still think, Chicago is just obviously a much stronger team overall. But
don't slight Milwaukee.
I'm
just looking at their stats.
Hey man,
now.
I was championing them going into this season.
For sure.
If previous listeners remember,
I think if you would have said that they would lose Jabari Parker after 25 games to a torn ACL, and they'd trade Brandon Knight, and you'd say they were in the playoffs.
Well, they did get Carter Williams.
True, but
pretty much equivalent.
I think I wouldn't have believed it for sure.
Right. Well, and have the Sanders thing.
Yeah.
That went on.
Larry Sanders.
His retirement. But no, what I remember when we looked at this team, it's just the roster. While not having a super standout guy, there's a lot of quality of solid players.
I'd say it's very similar to Boston, but a better talent pool. You got a lot of guys that got a lot of young players, and you got a lot of guys maybe like an OJ Mayo or a Pachulia, Jared Bayless, Jared Dudley. Just guys that are really just solid players. And these are one of the few teams that they could start for.
Right. They're a balanced, good young roster.
Yeah, they have a good balance of experience and young talent, which I think is the key to really any team. But that's something Boston doesn't have. They don't have the experience. Very little of it. I'd say definitely for the future, look out for Boston and Milwaukee.
Oh yeah, they're. Well, Boston certainly is ahead of schedule this season.
Yeah.
And honestly, I think that the gains in confidence and respectability from this season sort of outweigh benefits if they had tanked. Because you could make the argument that they were better off just tanking this season, but it's a tough road to go down because do you really want to look like Philadelphia for a few years? And I respect the plan that Philadelphia has, but I think most fans, especially Boston fans, would agree that they prefer this than stockpiling draft picks, even if that might be the more tenable long-term plan.
Yeah.
I think this season has been worthwhile for them.
Right.
But I think we both agree that Chicago wins this series.
I think Chicago wins in 4 or 5. I'm not ready to commit to a number, but the series will be over in 5 games at least.
Yeah, this is another one where I wouldn't be totally surprised if it went 6, but I think 5 is probably the most reasonable number.
Alright, so our last matchup, possibly could be the best matchup in terms of the amount of games it takes to find a winner.
Right, closeness of skill level.
Right.
Two teams in Toronto and Washington that really had really bright starts to the season and have sort of
cooled off, and they sort of picked it up at the end of the year. So look at that whichever way you want. But this series, maybe I'm sort of biased towards Toronto, but I just feel like Toronto's just one of those teams. Like if they can get past the first round, because that seems like it's always. Whenever they're in the playoffs, it always seems like they can't make it out of the first round.
Sure, well, the Vince Carter years.
And with their fans, I mean, I think their fans really deserve, to host an Eastern Conference semifinals series.
Sure. But in terms of the matchup itself, I think that there's just too much asked of John Wall for Washington.
Yeah.
And he's obviously a very good player, but I don't think he's quite up to the task of being the star point guard on the level of like a Chris Paul or a Russell Westbrook. I don't think he's that caliber, clearly.
I mean, they have a nice roster, Bradley Beal's a shooter. He's actually expanded his game a little bit. Gortat, gives you a bunch of toughness inside. Paul Pierce is the wily veteran who's still playing at a decently, high level. I mean, obviously he's not the player he once was, but anytime you average, close to 12 points a game, and he's shooting 44%, 39% from 3. So
he's certainly of the Boston 3. He's certainly the only. Well, obviously Allen's out of the league this season, but with him and Garnett, he's really kept his play up at a decent level.
Yeah.
But I think that Toronto's just overall more talented, and that Wall you can't be efficient when there's so much. You're asked to do so much. I think.
Right.
I don't think he's up to the task.
Look how far DeJuan Blair has fallen. He's averaging about 1 point a game.
Yeah. He's fallen off. I think the quality of benches are close with the slight edge to Toronto.
Yeah. I feel like I really find an interesting comparison between Toronto and Portland.
Yeah. Well.
Just in terms of.
They're both 4 seeds.
Yeah, not that, but just the fact that they're on sort of opposite sides of. Obviously, Toronto's in Canada, but they're on opposite side time zones. I almost feel like their arenas are sort of similar. I don't know what brings that comparison, but I don't know.
Well, they both have sort of super athletic scoring point guards, in Lowry and Lillard, but they're definitely a fun athletic team to watch, and I think that they'll win this series. My first inclination was to say 6, but honestly, the way Washington has tailed off, I'm tempted to say 5 for Toronto.
I definitely think the quicker Toronto gets over with this series, the better, because they would have to face. They'd have to face
Atlanta.
the 1 seed. Which, I mean, say what you want. Yeah, Atlanta's a 1 seed, but I think we can all agree that the true 1 seed is Cleveland.
Well, yeah, I mean,
unofficial 1 seed is Cleveland.
I think I'm not going to say that Cleveland is like a significant amount better than Atlanta.
Yeah, well, you don't have to be a significant amount better.
And I'd maybe say slightly, based on the roster changes throughout the season. But I think a series. But I'm not gonna. Well, I mean, we'll get to the later rounds later. But I wouldn't say that. I'd say Cleveland in 5. But anyway, so
I'll say Toronto in 5.
All right.
So just to recap, we have Atlanta. I said Atlanta in. What did I say? Atlanta in 5, I think.
Yeah, I think we both settled on 5.
Atlanta in 5. Cleveland sweep. Chicago in 5. And Toronto in 5. So really, if we're going by our predictions, this really shouldn't be.
I mean,
it really shouldn't be a competitive first round of the Eastern Conference.
Well, Washington could give Toronto a little trouble, but I just think the odds are that they'll finish them.
But I think the fact that both of us are saying all of these series are getting over before the 6th game, I think kind of shows.
Right. Well, because it's a super weak bottom half of the Eastern bracket. I think that's just a fact of, and it's not an incredibly strong upper half either. But that's the Eastern Conference for you. So that covers the first round from both conferences. And if you missed our other video, we covered the first round of the Western Conference. So now let's move on to, I guess, the latter rounds of the Eastern Conference, and then we'll follow that with the Western Conference, and then we'll proclaim a champion.
And then have some closing thoughts.
Right. So in our scenario, Atlanta will play Toronto in the second round. And I think that Atlanta will not necessarily have an easy time with them, but will still prevail in that series in 6 games. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, I mean, there's really we don't need to go as in depth for these because A, these are just predictions. We don't know who's going to be playing each other. And B, we just kind of went in depth with each team already. Something tells me Toronto's going to beat Atlanta. And you're going to see Toronto and Cleveland in the Eastern Conference Finals.
All right. Do you have anything that you're pointing to that makes you think that way, or is it just sort of a gut inclination?
It's part gut feeling, part picking with my heart.
So, gut feeling.
Yeah.
Geez, what do you have against Atlanta? Just hate the city. All the people.
It's more of Toronto's fans and the fact that I feel like they deserve to.
Well, Toronto's fans, I mean, let's be honest, before the last couple of years, that place was empty most of the time. I remember during the Lynn run, that arena was full of Knicks fans, and even some of the people in Toronto jerseys were cheering when Lynn hit the buzzer beater. So, obviously they have a strong movement now, but let's not pretend that there's always been a loyal basketball culture in Toronto.
I mean, it hasn't been, people think, oh, Canada, they're just concerned about hockey in winter sports. But, they support the Blue Jays, they support, the Raptors.
Sure, they've rallied around them the last couple seasons, we can say.
I don't know. There's no rhyme or reason why I'm picking Toronto, but
Just want to do it so you look smart later.
I want to see it happen.
All right, well, that's.
I feel that Atlanta could potentially hit a wall, whether it's against Brooklyn or Toronto, where they're maybe end of season cooling off could catch up to them.
Sure.
But yeah, that's really the only. It's very poor reasoning, but
Well, I mean, you could say that they're sputtering. I get not sputtering, but their play is leveled off,
yeah.
where they're not quite. I mean, for a while they were neck and neck with Golden State, and they've not been able to keep that pace because obviously just Golden State is just more talented.
Yeah.
But well, I mean, so you're picking Toronto over Atlanta?
Picking Toronto over Atlanta in.
On purely will. You're willing them.
I really don't. I mean, I have a tough problem picking series that go 7 games unless it's the finals.
Well, look at last year in the West. I mean, we had a lot of
Eastern Conference Finals or Western Conference Finals or NBA Finals.
Well, even Western Conference first round last year.
But yeah, that's my very amateurish.
Hey, we're amateurs, so.
My very someone we won't mention, but we both know analysis, NBA analysis.
All right. Well, I think that covers that. So the next series would be Cleveland.
Cleveland, Chicago, which I think that has potential to be a really good series.
Sure. Yeah, I think obviously Chicago.
Obviously, it would be another Eastern Central Division matchup for both teams. So Chicago would be playing two of their division rivals.
Right. And I mean
that is one series I could see going 6.
Yeah. Well, and let me clarify just something before we actually put out numbers. I mean, you just did, but my thoughts about Cleveland. I think that they're the best team in this conference now, but by no means does that put them on the level of the dominant Western Conference teams yet necessarily. So it's not as if they'll just like walk over Chicago.
I don't expect them to.
No, I think 6 games is probably a fair assessment for this series. Although, well, I'm tempted to say 5, just because I don't just Chicago just lacks offense.
Yeah.
I mean, well, not as much as they've had that problem in previous years.
It's that division rival mentality thing, though. I feel like, Chicago's really gonna get up for Cleveland. I feel like I could see all those games potentially being really close. I think Cleveland's gonna, in the end, pull through and win the series, but I think that's definitely a series to pencil in as maybe a really good series.
Yeah, I could see that, but I think the biggest sticking point for me, well, there's 2, is that the biggest thing is who is going to defend Love. I don't see a capable someone who can counter his skill set on who's playing significant minutes, because it's certainly not going to be Gasol, because Gasol really has a difficult time playing much of any defense these days. So I think that's a huge problem, because Love is just such an unconventional player. So,
take a bathroom break. Keep talking.
Oh no.
We're back.
Anyway, after unexpected break in the action.
Slight mishap.
Right. We were discussing Cleveland versus Chicago and how I just don't think that Chicago has the weapons to match Cleveland's. That's what it comes down to. They're just not going to be able to keep up with their scoring pace. But I'll say Cleveland in 6 games, just to be fair to Chicago.
Yeah, that's what I said.
So.
And if we keep on that trend, well, who did you say? Toronto and
Atlanta.
Okay. So for me, I mean, I think Toronto's run would end there against Cleveland. I almost worry at that point if they'd have the mental stability or the mental rest to sort of compete with Cleveland.
Mm-hmm.
After making it obviously the farthest they've ever gotten in their history. I'd probably see that series going 5 games for Cleveland. But maybe I'll be wrong. I don't know.
Well, as opposed to you, I have, I guess, chalk all the way through the Eastern Conference, but I think the trend will end with Cleveland beating Atlanta, and I'm very hesitant to say that because I feel like a lot of people have written off Atlanta, just like they write off the Clippers on name alone and say, well, they've never made a run, but I think that's sort of silly with how fluid rosters are these days to assign an identity to a team where they don't really have much in common with the teams of old. But still, I think that Cleveland is the slightly superior team.
Mm-hmm.
So I would probably pick them in 6 games to beat Atlanta. But with the caveat of that it wouldn't be surprising if it went the other way.
Right.
And it really would be funny to see Atlanta in the NBA Finals. It's just...
Hey, maybe.
I mean, that's what I'll be pulling for. I'll be pulling for my prediction to be wrong.
Hey, maybe their fans will actually show up if they make it to the finals.
Hey, whoa, man, jeez.
I'll fire that shot. It's a disgrace that they're number 1 seed and they really struggled to.
All right, let's not.
They really struggled to fill Phillips Arena.
Let's not go so far to say it's a disgrace.
If it is
when the owner has
still Phillips Arena.
When management for them has gone out of their way to say that they want more white people in the arena, or that they're confused why they attract so many black people. It's not so surprising to see why people wouldn't necessarily want to support that team. But yeah, I think that they'll get fine attendance numbers for the playoffs, with probably a lot of recent Cleveland converts in the crowd in that hypothetical series.
As always, we haven't mentioned bandwagon fans.
Well, it's hey, people like winners, so.
Yeah. All right. So
anyway,
we're gonna switch over to the Western Conference now.
So we both have Cleveland in the NBA
we
Finals.
both have Cleveland in the NBA Finals.
It's cliche. It's not surprising, or it's not any sort of bold
But
pick.
hey, sometimes the correct pick is the obvious one. And, I definitely think in the East it's definitely easier to pick.
And I'm not even
certain teams.
I'm not even gonna be so bold to say that it's like objectively correct, because I've seen many in my little bit of research that I've done for this, in addition to just watching a lot of games throughout the season. I've seen a lot of rating systems evaluate Atlanta as being a little better, so it's certainly not like a foregone conclusion that Cleveland will just beat them.
Yeah.
So with that, let's move on to the latter rounds of the Western Conference.
So we would have Golden State facing
Memphis in both of our scenarios.
Right. Yeah.
And, well, Memphis can give them fits, I still think Golden State is just ridiculous.
Yeah.
Just their roster is just insane. Like, looking at it, and then I would give them a slight coaching edge in that series. And I think they beat them in. Well, you see,
you saying that Golden State is amazing makes me wonder what if Oklahoma City had won or had gotten that 8 seed? How great of a first round matchup would that have been with Golden State? I think from a ratings perspective.
Well, I guess, but it's not exactly like major markets squaring off with each other.
But, people want to watch.
Sure.
I think more people would tune in for that matchup than Clippers Spurs.
Right. Well, yeah, that's a good. I don't know.
No slight against those teams.
Anyway, I think just Golden State is clearly better. No slight on Memphis, but I'll pick them in. Well, I'll pick them in 6 games just because the strain, the physical strain when you've played so many games already can bring some teams down. And
that's one thing we really haven't talked about is these teams that are the higher seeds, the quicker they get done with their series, the more rest time they have, and maybe these teams that are 4-5 matchups or 3-6, they might be going 5-6 games versus the 1s and the 1s and 2 seeds going potentially 4 games, 5 games. So that's an extra day of rest, maybe 2. So that's definitely something to keep an eye open for.
Right. But yeah, I think we still conclude that Golden State.
I'll say Golden State in 5. I'll give Memphis a game.
Yeah, I'm tempted to give them 2. But yeah, no, I really logically I think 5 is. Well, I'm just trying to think about past years and teams that have had about the same talent disparity and thinking about how those series have gone. I feel like just sort of anecdotally calling a couple series to mind that this round usually the series will go 6 games, so I'm just going to say that just totally anecdotally and without much to back it up. So yeah, Golden State in 6.
Our second matchup would be Houston and Clippers.
Mm-hmm. Well, you picked San Antonio.
Clippers, San Antonio for me, or Houston, San Antonio. Another Texas showdown. This is another one. I could definitely see San Antonio winning that series and making it again to a conference finals. Where I'm predicting they'll lose to Golden State, but we'll wait on that. And just like I said, I think San Antonio would win a series with Houston. Obviously, it's it's predicated on if they beat the Clippers in the first round matchup. But
well, we're going with that for your hypothetical world.
Yeah.
So do you have San Antonio over?
I have San Antonio over Houston in 7 games.
Wild series.
Yep.
So as for my...
Everything's bigger in Texas.
Sure, why not? I have Los Angeles against Houston, and even though... Well, I've kind of been a champion of both of these teams, because I think both of them sort of have unfair reputations based on the history of the organization. But I just think that Los Angeles just has all the pieces they need to make this the year that is their deep run. I think Paul, just because I love him as a player, is due finally for a deep playoff run.
Yes, he is.
And I think this is probably the best chance that they'll have at it. Especially with a heavyweight contender like Oklahoma City out.
Yep.
And even if they would have made it, they would have been at not even close to full strength. So yeah, I'll pick Los Angeles in 6 games over Houston.
Yeah. For that reason, I'm with you. I'd like to see Chris Paul make a decent playoff run. I feel
just because
his career needs it.
No. I'm not. Hold on. I'm not saying that.
I think everybody that's a fan of the NBA agrees that he deserves to display his talents later on in the playoffs.
I'm not saying he needs it, because I think his legacy, whatever that means, is already cemented in my mind. I think he's like probably one of the 15 best players ever. And maybe
that's a really bold statement.
Well, I think that if you compare him to like say Stockton, and you can make a strong argument that he's as good or better than even Stockton. And Stockton never won a championship, and look how we regard him. So I think that, yes, it would be a nice capstone, although, I mean, he's got a lot of years left in his career, so capstone is kind of a silly word. But it would be a nice piece of his career for him to make a deep run and maybe even win a championship.
Right.
But I think his career stands on its own already. But nevertheless, it's what he wants, obviously, and I think this is their best opportunity to do it. And so I'll pick them over Houston because I think that they're the better team. So yeah, that in 6 games.
Okay. And making our way to the conference finals, you have the Clippers against Golden State. I have Golden State against San Antonio.
Oh, I so want to pick Los Angeles in this series, but I think it's kind of, well.
Now I'm going chalk. I think Golden State's going to face Cleveland in the NBA Finals.
Right. I mean, I think Golden State is obviously better, but I'm tempted to say that. Well, no. I guess based on just how I'm picking, I think that Los Angeles is the second best team in the league. So, and that there's not such a huge disparity. Where
whether it's the Clippers or Spurs, I see this series going 7 games.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair. Well, yeah, I mean, hey. But just to be contrarian, because I know like everyone is picking Golden State to win, and because I think that, and not just to totally be contrarian, because I think that Los Angeles has a legitimate shot to win.
Well, I think you'd be more out there if you picked San Antonio to make it through.
Sure, but I'll pick the Clippers in 7, just because.
Or Houston if you pick Houston to go all the way through.
Well, no, I picked Clippers over.
I know, but if you're looking for a newsworthy pick.
Well, I mean, I don't think any of those picks is particularly wild. Like, I don't think that's that out of the realm of possibility, because the NBA playoffs are probably the most predictable playoffs of all the major American sports. But still, unpredictable stuff can happen, especially when you have teams that are not that far off of each other, which I think that Los Angeles and Golden State are not that far off. So I'll pick Los Angeles just to have a different opinion than the standard over Golden State.
Okay. And so that would make my finals would be Golden State and Cleveland, and yours would be
Cleveland.
Los Angeles and Cleveland.
Yeah.
2 very interesting.
Yeah, Cleveland has certainly rebounded from their early struggles.
I think a lot of it depends on potential injuries. You always got to plan for those.
Oh yeah, as the playoffs usually hinge on health.
I think it depends who it is. Certainly for Cleveland, if it's LeBron, they might not even make it out of the East.
Well, yeah, I mean that's We can't live in that world because you can't predict around that. A likelier one is Love being injured because he's had so many problems with that this season.
Any of those three Western Conference teams, let's say a Blake Griffin or Chris Paul or San Antonio, their guys are hurt during the season, but they're not hurt in the postseason. It seems like.
Right. Well, but hey, not to curtail this, but we're kind of running along. Let's keep the discussion on the teams that we actually have in.
Okay.
I know it's easy to go off on tangents. So you have Golden State versus Cleveland. How do you feel it will go?
That's a toss-up for me, really. It's a real toss-up.
See, I don't think it is with those two teams. I know it's your hypothetical, but I think Golden State is clearly better.
I'm trying not to let my bias for Cleveland play into it.
I really love Cleveland so much.
Well, I have family there.
Okay. I mean, it's still a shithole. But hey.
Sorry if we offended any
But
Ohioans.
the chance of that was, we'll probably get maybe generously 40 viewers on this video, and people to be listening at this point.
We salute you.
Hey, if you're listening, fuck Cleveland. They got the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and sadness.
Joakim Noah statement there about Cleveland.
That's right. Anyway.
You're right. I think.
I mean, I don't want to sway you. Like, it's your series.
I'm actually not ready to make a pick on that.
All right. It's fair. So I have a pretty definite opinion. I think Cleveland is really good, but I think that there might be similar happening to the Heat's first season with their three that, I mean, just let me preface this. I don't necessarily usually put a lot of weight on playoff experience, but the fact is that Cleveland is very lacking in, two of their big three in any sort of playoff experience of any importance. And the fact that I think that Los Angeles is just a little better overall. Yeah, no, I'm going to have to pick Los Angeles in this series.
Well, if you look at Cleveland, their playoff experience is on the bench.
Right.
They got Marion, they got Mike Miller, they got James Jones.
Well, and guys who are not going to have any real relevant impact on the series. Right.
Obviously.
And obviously James.
Yeah.
And I think that he'll play perfectly fine. I don't buy into any of the narrative that people build up around him.
LeBron James. Oh well, I was gonna say LeBron James, the player with the most titles in these playoffs, but San Antonio. Matt Bonner has more than him.
Yeah, hey.
No slight against Matt.
MVP.
I hope you step up, Matt.
And just factoring in also I would say, reasonable probability of Love being injured in these playoffs pushes it even more in the favor of Los Angeles. So, as weird as it sounds, I'm going to pick the Clippers to win the NBA championship.
Wouldn't that be something?
I think it's
just a year removed from the Sterling allegations as well.
Right. Well, and I mean, last year they were a serious contender to win as well. Right. So, I mean, I think
that whole thing occurred during the playoffs, right?
Yeah, like near the beginning. Yeah. I think we create narratives of, and this isn't just reserved to sport or basketball or sports. I think it's reserved to history, that we create narratives of inevitability when things go a certain way, where things could have gone totally differently in last year's playoffs. I mean, hell, San Antonio could have lost in the first round to Dallas. They were, I think the seventh game went to overtime or close to it.
I know, it definitely went 7 games.
And it just, after the playoffs, when San Antonio handled Miami the way they did, this narrative, oh, no one was ever going to beat the Spurs. which I think that they were the best team, but the sense that it was inevitable that they were going to win is incorrect. And I think some people have that notion about Golden State. So yeah, my pick is Los Angeles over Cleveland in 7 games, just because I hope it's a great series.
Just for the sake of mine, I'll say Golden State in 6 games over Cleveland.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair.
Whether our picks are right or wrong, I think there's a plethora of storylines and interesting matchups and some, we discussed it a little bit, but, maybe some potential shakeup in terms of coaches.
Right.
After these playoffs end. So it should definitely be interesting.
Yeah, it's been fascinating to see these teams rise up into the void of Miami.
Right.
And they sort of cast a teams emerge into the role. And hey, it's not like all the contenders from the last few seasons are gone. I mean, San Antonio is a serious threat.
Yeah.
Still.
Cleveland's back in it, which is always we didn't talk about that. They're back in the playoffs for the first time since 2009.
Well, it sort of speaks for itself,
For obvious reasons, just
Moskov. Yeah,
I was gonna say Joe Harris, but
well, that's fair too.
Matty D.
Yeah, the Del boy. So yeah, it'll definitely be. I don't know if we can get a repeat last year's Western Conference first round, because that was just absolutely incredible. If you even have a mild interest in the sport, and certainly for enthusiasts, they enjoyed it all the more. But yeah, so I think we'll close on that. We're looking.
Close on that note. Should be. I think if there's one, give me one adjective to describe what these playoffs are going to be.
Chaotic. I think that both of our predictions are gonna, especially in the West, are.
Yeah.
I think that it's inevitable that we'll have things wrong, and I look forward to it. I think it would be really cool to see either like Atlanta get into the championship, or Golden State, or Los Angeles, or, I mean, even I could conceivably see Memphis even making a run to the championship. Yeah. So, yeah, it's going to be another fascinating playoff season.
Yep. Well, we hope you enjoyed these 2 podcasts and have fun cheering for your team if your team's in it. If your team's not, hopefully you have fun watching some great basketball. Until next time, we'll sign off here. Thanks.